because we're coming up at the end of the year, just wanted to check in, the past year in terms of legislation. Let's just start real easy. What do you think has been the best legislation that you've been a part of and that the federal government has had a hand in?
Well, I would say the most important piece of legislation we passed was the National Defense Authorization Act, which has a 60-year tradition of being passed on a broad bipartisan basis, and this year wasn't any exception. I know the nature of news is you guys report it when we disagree with each other, but when we agree, it's obviously less newsworthy, but that was an important thing for us to do on a broad bipartisan basis. And then the other piece of legislation that I've been working on for some time that passed the Senate, but not the House yet, had to do with eliminating some of our vulnerable supply chains on things as important as semiconductors. Everything that has an off and on switch that our technologically driven world depends on those semiconductors. And so that's been a big project that I've been working on, and hopefully we'll get it over the finish line by February.
So we've had a year of a new Congress. What do you expect to see next year?
Well, I guess, the big drama here at the end of this year was Joe Manchin saying he couldn't go along with a partisan Build Back Better bill because of his concerns about inflation and spending. And I think that was a real profile in courage. You can imagine the pressure that he was under. But, he comes from West Virginia, which is a pretty conservative state, even though it has historically been Democrat. And it reminds me of Texas in some ways, because while Texas during my lifetime has gone from a Democrat to a Republican state, it still is pretty much of a center-right state. Joe was reading the tea leaves and maybe the emails from his constituents and telling them that, this is not what they bargained for in the 2020 election. So I think the Biden administration was really overreading the mandate. In fact, they didn't get a mandate. It was a jump ball in 2020. So I don't think they should be surprised by the outcome here, but we'll see what they want to do in terms of picking up the pieces in 2022. Obviously, the closer we get to that November election in 2022, I think there's going to be some nervous Democrats who are not going to want to antagonize the voters by voting for things that are pretty much partisan or hard left agenda. So we'll continue to look for places we can work together. I have in the past, and I'll continue to do it in the future. But we're not going to capitulate to some of these pretty radical demands.
And I was going to ask, what do you think it would take to be more bipartisan as Congress as a whole? The past year, 2 years, even longer than that, we've seen a lot of partisanship. What will it take to really come together and mend those fences?
Well, we don't have to look back very far to see how well we can work together in the face of an emergency. The COVID-19 pandemic resulted in a number, I think 5 different spending pieces of legislation that passed almost unanimously because we knew it was an emergency. We knew we had to deal with the public health and the economic consequences of COVID-19. That seemed to be abandoned after January the 20th of this year, when President Biden became president, with some rare exceptions like the infrastructure bill, which did pass with broad bipartisan support. I already mentioned the defense authorization bill as well. So let me just say, I don't think things are quite as bad as advertised in Washington, D.C. I don't think the country is broken. I don't think Congress is incapable of dealing with big issues. But the fact of the matter is, when you're split down the middle, you got to work together. And that's, I think, part of the genius of our system. It forces human nature to do what we wouldn't necessarily want to do naturally, which is to make concessions and negotiate compromises in the best interest of the country. But that's the genius of our system.
Speaking of the pandemic, we're seeing a rise in Omicron cases across the country, including here in Texas. We had our first Omicron-related death in Harris County. Is there anything that you are looking to do in the next year, in the coming year, in regards to the pandemic and making sure that we come out of this okay?
Well, the most important thing is for people to continue to get vaccinated if they haven't been vaccinated. I saw President Trump just got the booster, and good for him. And I would encourage everybody who's concerned about the virus to make sure they're fully vaccinated. And but the other part of it that I'm more distressed by is apparently the shortage and lack of access to testing. You know, we've invested billions and billions, even trillions of dollars in COVID-19 relief. And this is the thing that I remember talking to Governor Abbott about at the very beginning of the pandemic. He told me he needed two things. He needed testing and PPE, or personal protective equipment. And for this not to be readily available to Americans is very distressing. So I hope the president addresses some of that when he speaks to the nation today on Omicron. I just can't imagine any excuses for not having readily available testing, which is one of our front lines of defense against this variant.
And you mentioned the different bills or funding bills as a result of the pandemic that has been passed by Congress and signed by the president. In your opinion, who do you think should be the ones to distribute funding? Should it come from, the federal government and distribute it everywhere it should go, or kind of delegate that to the smaller levels of government?
Well, that's actually been a principal bone of contention because ordinarily the money flows to the state and then to the counties and the cities from the state. And I can tell you from experience, when we're talking about things like Hurricane Harvey relief, it takes not just months, but sometimes years for the money to get to the intended beneficiary. But we modified some of the funding stream to make sure that counties and cities of certain size, I think it was 500,000 people, could get that money directly. And now I've introduced legislation. It's part of it's a bill with Alex Padilla, a Democrat from California, that gives the states and counties and cities more flexibility in spending that COVID-19 relief money on other worthy projects if they don't need it for COVID-19. But I would think a little bit of tapping the brakes would be in order, because we don't really know exactly what's going to happen with Omicron yet. Although while it seems more transmissible and it's spreading very fast, the symptoms, particularly among those who are vaccinated, are either non-existent or minimal, which is the good news from the vaccine. But I think the leadership in the state level and the state and the county and local level have done a good job under the circumstances, trying to get the relief to Americans and to Texans in an expeditious and effective way.
And this next one's going to be kind of a specific question for our area, but recently we've been covering Williamson County and Judge Gravel and the Commissioner's Court kind of withholding some of that CARES Act money from a couple school districts because of certain reading materials, optional reading materials that are available to students. I sent Murphy a little bit of our coverage out, and I don't know if you got a chance to look at it or not, but was wondering, should counties be able to kind of withhold that from school districts when it's really affecting so many students or so many kids that are in their area?
Well, that's, my hope would be is that all the counties and the cities and the state would not embrace, let's say, collateral issues, no matter how important they are, when it comes to the public health. I don't know enough about what you described to know whether, what the circumstances are. But I know Judge Gravel well enough to know that he's going to put public health at foremost. And but these other issues are important too. But we got to focus on the virus first and foremost.
And going forward, what are you most looking forward to in 2022?
Well, I'm looking forward to the possibility that we can get the majority in the Senate and change the agenda. 2020 was pretty obviously a consequential election, but I've been in the majority and been in the minority, and I can tell you being in the majority is a lot more fun, and you can get a lot more things done that benefit your state, and that's certainly my priority. But I'm sure there are going to be hundreds of different issues, which is part of the what I enjoy most about my job, both expected and unexpected, that are going to pop up in 2022. And remain feeling honored to be able to serve 29 million Texans in this job, as challenging as it sometimes is. I know when I tell people I love my job, they sometimes look at me like I have three heads, because they wonder who could possibly enjoy that circus in Washington, D.C. But it's important, and a lot of important things get done there, and a lot of important things get stopped there. And I just appreciate the honor of representing each of them in the Senate on these important issues.
And I had something else for you, but I'm blanking on it now. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about, the end of the year? Anything else that you think that I missed?
You're too young, Mike, to have those senior moments, but it happens to the best of us. No, I just would wish everybody a happy, healthy Christmas and New Year. I hope people get a chance to spend time with their families on things that are important. I know it's hard today to keep focused sometimes on those priorities in our own lives because there's so many things tugging at our attention and trying to drive us crazy. But I think this is a great time of the year to sort of count our blessings and to be thankful for what we have, and to recommit to do better next year than we did this year.
Actually, I just remembered what I was going to ask because of your answer. Build Back Better. Obviously, it's a pretty big movement by President Biden and the White House. What your take on it? As the as the year ends and 2022 begins.
Well, I'm grateful to Senator Manchin for putting the brakes on this, what I think was a mistake of a bill. First of all, it wasn't even honestly scored in terms of the cost. And one of the things he was concerned about too was inflation, which I'm very concerned about, because we're all seeing the price of gasoline and food and other necessities going up dramatically. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the federal government has spent so much money into our economy chasing limited goods and services, putting stress on supply chains and driving up prices. So if there are parts of the bill that Democrats want to talk to us about and try to work together to build consensus on, we remain open to that. But I think this is the best Christmas present any of us could have hoped for, is to stop the Build Back Better bill, or as I call it, Build Back Broke or Build Back Bankrupt. It was a bad idea. And it was really, I think, a miscalculation to try to do something this aggressive in a partisan and purely a party line vote. And Senator Manchin put a stop to that, and good for him. I know had to be a lot of pressure being applied, but this is what forces debate and deliberation and consensus building, which is built into our system. And so to me, it says our system continues to work. Not all the time, not necessarily the way we all want it to, or as fast as we want it to, but this is the way our system works, and I'm grateful for that.
All right, Senator, thank you so much, and have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
You too. You too. Take care. Thank you.